Welcome to HOA Outplayed. The HOA wanted control, not safety. She was already screaming before I even made it down the driveway. You are going to remove that structure right now, or I am calling a tow truck for your vehicle. I looked at Stephanie Garcia, board secretary for Spruce and Snow HOA Incorporated, standing in 6 inches of fresh powder at the base of my front steps, waving a laminated rule card like it was a warrant. The temporary handrail I had bolted to the brick 2 days ago was still there, doing exactly what it was supposed to do, keeping my 72-year-old mother from eating pavement on black ice. I set down my small bucket of ice melt carefully and kept my voice level. That is a safety rail. My mom broke her wrist last winter on these stairs. Stephanie cut me off. This conversation is not a debate, it is a directive. That is an unapproved exterior modification under Section 4.7, and you have until end of business today to remove it, or you will be fined $200 per day until compliance. I moved to Billings, Montana 8 months ago for work. I am a licensed electrician, and I took a job with a commercial contractor that pays well enough to dig me out of the hole I fell into after a rough divorce and a year of underemployment. I bought a small ranch house in a neighborhood that looked quiet and affordable. Spruce and Snow HOA Incorporated turned out to be anything but quiet. The fees were reasonable on paper, but the enforcement was surgical. Certain homes, the ones owned by board members or their friends, got away with everything. Broken fence panels, cars parked on lawns, trash cans left out for days. My side of the development got cited for leaving a garden hose visible in November. I was rebuilding my finances after a bad year and I could not absorb bogus fees. But Stephanie did not care about that. She cared about control. The handrail was the trigger, but the fight had been building since December. That was when the HOA switched to refusing to accept payments, then charging late fees for the refusal. I mailed my quarterly dues check on time. It was cashed 2 weeks later. Then I got a notice saying I was delinquent and owed a $50 late fee. I called the management company. They said all payments had to go through the online portal now, even though I had never received an email about the change. I logged into the portal. It showed my account as current. I took a screenshot. 2 days later, the portal showed me 60 days past due with a $100 penalty. I took another screenshot. The numbers did not match the paper notices I was getting in the mail, and the mailing dates did not line up with the postmarks. I started keeping everything. Stephanie did not know I was doing that. She thought I was just another frustrated homeowner who would pay up and shut up. But I had learned the hard way that documentation is the only thing that matters when someone decides to weaponize paperwork. So when she showed up at my driveway that morning yelling about the handrail, I did not argue. I just pulled out my phone and started recording. She noticed immediately. "What are you doing?" I kept the phone steady, documenting this conversation. "You just threatened to tow my car over a safety device." She stepped closer, her boots crunching in the snow. "You do not have my consent to record me." I smiled. "Montana is a one-party consent state. I am the one party." She turned red. "Fine. Make it public. I love watching people get embarrassed." Then she spun around and marched back toward her Subaru, parked sideways across the end of my driveway. I stopped arguing and started collecting, because the endgame was already set. I had been gathering proof for weeks. Payment confirmations proving I was never delinquent despite their winter fee blast. Screenshots of portal discrepancies. Emails with conflicting instructions. Notices with altered dates and recycled photos. I had all of it organized in a folder on my laptop, and I had already scheduled a consultation with an attorney for the following week. But the handrail was new, and I knew Stephanie was going to use it as the excuse to escalate. The first escalation came that same afternoon. I got an email from the HOA compliance address with a formal violation notice attached. The subject line was "Final Warning, Exterior Modification." I opened the PDF. It was dated 3 days earlier, before I had even installed the handrail. The photo showed my front steps with no handrail visible, but the text described an unapproved structure and cited Section 4.7. The notice claimed this was my second warning, and that I had 10 days to comply or face a lien. I had never received a first warning. I checked my email archive, my spam folder, my physical mail log. Nothing. This was a fabricated violation notice with altered dates and recycled photos, and it was so sloppy that I could prove it in 5 seconds. I forwarded the email to my attorney with a note. They are fabricating documents now. She replied within an hour. Do not remove the handrail. Document everything. If they try to enforce, we have grounds for harassment and possibly fraud. Keep me updated. I felt a little better, but I also knew Stephanie was not going to stop. She had a printed storm timeline she carried everywhere, a laminated card with snow accumulation forecasts, and city plow schedules that she used to argue about deadlines and compliance windows. I had seen her pull it out at a board meeting in January when another homeowner complained about a late snow removal citation. She used it to prove that the homeowner had violated the 48-hour rule, even though the snowfall had not stopped until hour 46 and the city had not cleared the streets until hour 50. The homeowner paid the fine. That was how it worked here. Stephanie won because she controlled the paperwork and nobody wanted to fight. But I was not nobody. I was a guy who had lost a house, a marriage, and 2 years of income because I trusted the system and did not keep records. I was not making that mistake again. The second escalation happened 3 days later. I came home from a job site to find a bright orange notice zip-tied to my mailbox. It was a towing warning. The text was printed on spruce and snow HOA incorporated letterhead, and it said that my vehicle was in violation of overnight parking restrictions due to unpaid fines, and that a tow truck had been authorized to remove it within 24 hours unless full payment was received. I looked at my truck. It was parked in my own driveway, on my own property, exactly where it had been every night for 8 months. There was no overnight parking restriction in the CCRs. I had read them cover to cover twice. This was a bluff, or it was Stephanie making up rules as she went. I called the management company. The receptionist put me on hold for 6 minutes, then told me that all enforcement decisions were handled by the board and that I would need to contact them directly. I asked for the board president's number. She said she could not give out personal contact information, but she could pass along a message. I left my number. Nobody called back. That night, I went through the CCRs again, page by page. Section 4.7 covered exterior modifications, but the language was vague. It said that any structural change to the exterior of a home required prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I had not submitted a request because the handrail was not structural, it was temporary. It was bolted into brick with expansion anchors and could be removed in 15 minutes. It was not a deck, not a fence, not a pergola. It was a safety grab bar, the kind you can buy at any hardware store. But the rule did not define structural, and that was the gap Stephanie was exploiting. I decided to go on the offensive. I drafted an email to the full board, copied the management company, and attached photos of 12 other homes in the development that had unapproved exterior modifications. Bird feeders mounted to siding, decorative shutters added to windows, garden arbors, patio string lights, mailbox toppers. None of them had been cited. I included addresses, photos with timestamps, and a polite request for clarification on the approval process. I asked why my safety handrail was being treated as a major violation while these other modifications were ignored. I hit send at 11 p.m. and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from Stephanie. Her voice was tight and clipped. Your email to the board was inappropriate and violates the community conduct standards. You are not permitted to photograph other homeowners' property without consent. Any further emails of this nature will result in additional fines for harassment. This is your only warning. I replayed the message twice, then saved it. There was no community conduct standard that prohibited photographing homes from the street. That was public view doctrine. She was making it up, and she was scared because my email had just put 12 examples of selective enforcement on the record in front of the whole board. 2 hours later, I got a call from a board member I had met once at a neighborhood barbecue. His name was Tom, and he was quiet, mid-50s, worked in IT. He sounded nervous. Hey, I got your email. Look, I just want to say, off the record, that I think Stephanie is out of line on this handrail thing. But I cannot say that in a meeting. She controls all the paperwork and the compliance logs, and if I push back, she will bury me in violations. I have seen her do it. I asked him what he meant. He hesitated. She keeps a personal spreadsheet of every homeowner who has ever complained or voted against her on anything. If your name is on that list, you get cited for everything. Peeling paint, grass too long, trash cans out 10 minutes early. It is relentless. I stayed off the list by keeping my head down. I do not like it, but I have a family and I cannot afford to fight. I asked him if he would testify to that if it came to a hearing or a lawsuit. He was quiet for a long moment. If it gets that far, maybe. But I need cover. I cannot be the only one. I thanked him and hung up. I had my first ally, even if he was scared. That afternoon, the snow started again. The forecast called for 6 to 8 inches by midnight, and the temperature was supposed to drop into the single digits. I went out to salt my steps and driveway, and I noticed a truck idling at the curb 3 houses down. It was a flatbed tow truck with amber strobes flashing, and there was a guy in a heavy coat standing next to it with a clipboard, talking to Stephanie. She was pointing at my house. I grabbed my phone and my jacket and walked down the street. The tow operator saw me coming and stepped back. Stephanie turned and smiled. This is the vehicle owner. He is in violation of multiple HOA rules, and his car is subject to immediate removal. The tow operator looked at me. You live here? I nodded. He looked at my truck in the driveway, then back at Stephanie. Lady, that is private property. I cannot tow a car off private property without a court order or a police request. Stephanie pulled out her laminated rule card. The HOA has the authority to enforce compliance through vehicle removal. It is in the CCRs. The operator shook his head. I do not care what your HOA says. I am not touching that truck unless you show me a signed contract that gives you towing rights on private driveways, and even then I would want to see a lawyer sign off. Stephanie's face went red. I am the board secretary. I have the authority. The operator closed his clipboard. Then call your lawyer and have them call me. I am not doing this. I stepped forward and pulled out my phone. I have payment confirmations proving I was never delinquent despite their winter fee blast. The portal shows I am current. The violation notice you sent me is dated before the handrail was even installed. You have no grounds to tow my car. The operator looked at me, then at Stephanie. She opened her mouth, then shut it. The operator climbed into his truck. You two figure this out. I am leaving. He pulled away, the amber strobes cutting through the falling snow. Stephanie turned on me. You just cost the HOA money. That call-out fee is going on your account. I kept recording. You tried to illegally tow my car. I have it on video. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the fury in her eyes. This conversation is not a debate. It is a directive. You will remove that handrail, you will pay your fines, and you will stop harassing the board, or I will make your life hell. Then she turned and walked away, her boots slipping slightly on the ice. I went inside and sent the video to my attorney. She called me 20 minutes later. This is gold. She just threatened you on camera after a failed illegal tow attempt. If she keeps escalating, we can get an injunction and possibly sue for harassment. Keep the handrail up. Keep recording everything. I asked her what the next step was. She said we should wait and see if Stephanie filed anything formal. If she does, we respond and counterclaim. If she does not, we let her dig the hole deeper. I felt a knot of tension loosen in my chest. I was not alone in this anymore. The third escalation came in the mail 2 days later. It was a certified letter, and I caught the postmark immediately. It was dated the same day as the snowstorm, but the storm had shut down the post office until the following afternoon. The letter could not have been mailed on the date it claimed. I opened it carefully. Inside was a notice of lien for unpaid fines totaling $800. The breakdown included $200 for the handrail, $200 for late payment penalties, $100 for the tow call-out fee, and $300 for harassment and non-compliance. None of it was legitimate. I photographed the envelope, the letter, and the postmark, then forwarded everything to my attorney. She responded within the hour. File a complaint with the state HOA ombudsman and the county recorder. This lien is fraudulent, and they cannot file it without a hearing. I am drafting a cease and desist. We are also going to demand a full audit of your account and copies of all board meeting minutes for the last 6 months. This is escalating fast, but we are in a strong position. Do not pay anything. I felt a surge of vindication, but also a low hum of dread. Stephanie was not going to back down. She was going to keep pushing until something broke. That same week, I got a break. One of the neighbors from the other side of the development, A guy named Rick, who worked nights at the hospital, stopped me at the mailbox cluster curb. He looked around to make sure nobody was watching, then pulled out his phone. "I heard what Stephanie is doing to you. She did the same thing to me last year. I paid $1,200 in bogus fines because I did not know I could fight it. But I saved all the emails." He showed me a thread where Stephanie had accused him of running a business out of his home because he had a work truck parked in his driveway. The emails included threats, altered citations, and a complaint log entry that was obviously written in Stephanie's voice, not Rick's. I asked him if he would be willing to share those emails with my attorney. He nodded. "If it helps take her down, absolutely." She has been running this HOA like her personal fiefdom for 3 years, and nobody has had the guts to stop her. I thanked him and got his contact information. By mid-February, I had a file 2 inches thick. Payment records, screenshots, photos, emails, voicemails, video, testimony from Tom and Rick. My attorney sent the cease and desist, and the HOA attorney responded with a letter saying that all enforcement actions were within the board's authority, and that I should direct any complaints to the annual meeting in March. My attorney fired back with a demand for an emergency hearing and a threat to file a civil suit if the lien was not withdrawn immediately. The HOA attorney went silent for a week. Then the second set piece hit. I came home from a job in Laurel to find a contractor's truck in my driveway and a guy in coveralls standing next to my truck with a wheel clamp in his hand. I slammed my door and ran over. "What are you doing?" He looked up. "I got a work order to boot this vehicle for unpaid HOA fines." I pulled out my phone. "Who gave you that work order?" He showed me a printed sheet with spruce and snow HOA letterhead. It listed my address, my truck's license plate, and a balance due of $800. I took a photo of the sheet, then pulled up the CCRs on my phone. "Show me where it says the HOA can boot a car on private property." He squinted at the screen, then looked back at his work order. "Lady who called me said it was standard enforcement." I scrolled to Section 9.4, which covered vehicle enforcement. It allowed for towing of abandoned or inoperable vehicles on common property, but it said nothing about boots and nothing about private driveways. I showed him the section. He read it, then looked at the clamp in his hand. "Yeah, this does not say anything about boots." He picked up his phone and called someone. "Hey, I am at the Billings job. The homeowner is saying the HOA does not have the authority to boot his car. Can you clarify?" He listened for a moment, then hung up. "My supervisor says if the HOA does not have it in writing, I cannot do it. Liability issue. Sorry for the confusion." He loaded the clamp back into his truck and left. I called my attorney immediately. She laughed when I told her. "That is attempted extortion. They are just making up enforcement methods now. File a police report and send me photos of everything." I drove to the police station and filed a report for attempted vehicle immobilization under false pretenses. The officer taking the report was skeptical at first, but when I showed him the CCRs and the work order, he made notes and said he would forward it to the detective division. He also suggested I get a restraining order if the harassment continued. I thanked him and left. That night, Stephanie called my cell. I did not recognize the number at first, but I answered. Her voice was ice. "You called the police." I kept my tone calm. "You tried to have my car booted illegally." She did not miss a beat. "That contractor misunderstood the work order. It was a miscommunication." I said nothing. She continued. "You are making this very difficult for everyone. If you would just pay your fines and remove the handrail, this would all go away." I took a breath. "I do not owe any fines. My account is current. The handrail is legal. And if you contact me again outside of official HOA channels, I will add it to the harassment complaint." She hung up. 2 weeks later, the first crack in the HOA's facade appeared. My attorney got a call from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Paul who worked for a firm in Bozeman. He said he was withdrawing from the case. He did not give details, but he sent a letter to the board that was copied to my attorney. It said that after reviewing the file, he had concerns about the validity of certain enforcement actions, and that he could not in good conscience continue to represent the board in this matter. He recommended they seek independent legal counsel and consider a settlement. The letter was polite and professional, but the message was clear. The HOA had screwed up, and their lawyer was not going to cover for them. The board panicked. Without an attorney, they had no cover, and they had to answer homeowners directly. My attorney sent a formal settlement demand, full refund of all disputed fees, withdrawal of all liens and violations, written acknowledgement that the handrail was compliant, limits on enforcement discretion going forward, including mandatory documentation and appeal rights, and a requirement that all board members complete training on fiduciary duty and fair enforcement. The board scheduled an emergency meeting. I showed up with my attorney, Rick, and Tom. The meeting was held in the community center, a small room with folding tables and bad lighting. Stephanie sat at the head of the table with 2 other board members, both of whom looked uncomfortable. There were about 15 other homeowners in the room, most of whom I did not know. My attorney opened with a summary of the case: fabricated violations, selective enforcement, illegal towing and booting attempts, fraudulent liens. She laid it out calmly and methodically, and she entered copies of every document into the record. When she finished, she looked at Stephanie. "Do you dispute any of this?" Stephanie pulled out her laminated rule card and a printed storm timeline she carried everywhere. "These actions were within my authority as board secretary. The rules are clear." My attorney smiled. "Then let us review the rules." She opened the CCRs to section 4.7. "Read the definition of structural change." Stephanie read it aloud. "Any permanent alteration to the exterior load-bearing or decorative elements of a home." My attorney nodded. "Is a temporary handrail that can be removed in 15 minutes a permanent alteration?" Stephanie hesitated. "It is still an exterior modification." My attorney leaned forward. "Then why have you not cited the 12 other homes with unapproved exterior modifications?" Stephanie's face went red. "Those are decorative. They are not safety hazards." My attorney pulled out the photos I had sent. "So, a bird feeder is decorative, but a handrail that prevents falls is a hazard? Explain that." Stephanie did not answer. One of the other board members, a woman named Claire, cleared her throat. "I think we need to acknowledge that enforcement has been inconsistent. I have been uncomfortable with some of the actions taken in the last few months." Tom spoke up. "I will testify that Stephanie has been targeting homeowners who complain or vote against her. I have emails and meeting notes." Rick raised his hand. "She did the same thing to me last year. I paid fines I did not owe because I was afraid of retaliation." The room went silent. Stephanie looked around, her face pale. "This is a coordinated attack. You are all conspiring against me." My attorney shook her head. "This is homeowners exercising their rights. And unless the board agrees to a settlement, we will file a lawsuit and subpoena every document, every email, and every meeting recording for the last 3 years." If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama. Claire looked at Stephanie. "I think we need to settle." Stephanie slammed her hand on the table. "We have done nothing wrong." Claire did not flinch. "Stephanie," Paul withdrew. "We have no lawyer. We cannot afford a lawsuit. And frankly, I do not think we can defend this." The third board member, a man named Greg, nodded. "I agree, we should settle." Stephanie stood up, her chair scraping loudly. "Fine, do whatever you want, I am done." She grabbed her laminated rule card and her storm timeline and walked out. The door slammed behind her. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. The HOA agreed to a settlement that includes refunds and limits on enforcement. I got back every dollar I had been charged, plus reimbursement for my attorney fees. The handrail was formally approved as a safety device. The board adopted new rules requiring photo documentation, written warnings, and an appeal process before any fine could be assessed. And Stephanie was stripped of her compliance duties. She was still on the board, but she no longer had access to the portal or the authority to issue violations. That job went to a committee of 3 homeowners who rotated every quarter. But the real payoff came at the next board meeting. A homeowner I had never met stood up during public comment and asked why the HOA had been using a snow removal vendor that was charging twice the market rate. Claire looked confused. "What do you mean?" The homeowner pulled out a contract. "This is the agreement with Mountain States Plowing. They are charging $8,000 per storm. I got quotes from 3 other companies. They all said they could do it for $4,000. Claire asked to see the contract. She read it, then looked at Stephanie. "You negotiated this contract." Stephanie crossed her arms. They were the only vendor available when we needed one. The homeowner shook his head. That is not true. I called them. They said you specifically asked them to inflate the bid so the board could justify higher fees. The room exploded. Homeowners started shouting questions. Claire banged the gavel. We will investigate this. If there is evidence of vendor fraud, we will terminate the contract and pursue recovery. Stephanie tried to interrupt, but Greg cut her off. Stephanie, I think you should recuse yourself from this discussion. The plow vendor investigation took 3 weeks. The board hired an independent auditor who reviewed contracts, invoices, and email records. The auditor found that Stephanie had been in regular contact with the owner of Mountain States Plowing and had requested that they submit a high bid in exchange for guaranteed multi-year renewals. The plow vendor admits Karen asked them to exaggerate the hazard so she could win, and the board voted unanimously to cancel the vendor relationship tied to the abuse. Stephanie resigned 2 days later. But the karma beat I had been waiting for came during her resignation statement. She stood at the podium during the March annual meeting, red-faced and shaking, and read from a prepared script. She talked about her years of service, her dedication to the community, and the ingratitude of homeowners who did not understand the sacrifices she had made. Then, she pulled out her laminated rule card one last time and started reading. Under Section 12.3, board members are entitled to reimbursement for reasonable expenses incurred in the course of their duties. I am owed $4,000 for mileage, printing, and administrative costs over the last 2 years. Claire interrupted. Stephanie, Section 12.3 covers pre-approved expenses only. You never submitted a reimbursement request. Stephanie looked down at the card, her face going pale. That is not what it says. Claire picked up a copy of the CCRs and read aloud. Board members may request reimbursement for pre-approved expenses submitted in writing within 30 days of the expense. No reimbursement will be granted without prior board approval. Stephanie looked at the card again, and I saw her mouth move as she read the text. She had been carrying around a rule card with the wrong section printed on it. She had been waving it at people for months, using it to justify her authority, and she had never actually read the real rule. The room went silent. Then, someone in the back started laughing. It spread. Stephanie dropped the card and walked out. Karen gets stripped of access to the portal admin tools the following week. The board voted to remove her from all committees and limit her role to attending monthly meetings with no enforcement authority. She stopped coming after 2 months. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she sold her house in June and moved to Missoula. I do not know if that is true, but I have not seen her since March. The handrail is still on my front steps. My mom visits every other weekend, and she uses it every time. I added a second rail on the other side last fall, and this time I submitted it to the Architectural Review Committee. They approved it in 48 hours. The final confrontation, the one that made everything click into place, happened in late February, about a week before the emergency board meeting. I was walking back from the mailbox cluster curb, carrying a stack of catalogs and bills, when Stephanie pulled up in her Subaru and parked sideways across the sidewalk. She got out holding her clipboard and her laminated rule card, and she walked straight at me. I need to talk to you. I kept walking. You can send me an email. She stepped in front of me, blocking the path. No, we are going to settle this right now. You are going to remove that handrail, pay your fines, and drop this lawyer nonsense, or I am going to make sure you regret ever moving here. I stopped and set down my mail on top of a snowbank. A sheriff's deputy was parked at the corner, running radar. I raised my voice slightly. Stephanie, you are blocking a public sidewalk and threatening me. Move. She stepped closer, so close I could smell her coffee breath. This conversation is not a debate, it is a directive. Make it public. I love watching people get embarrassed. I pulled out my phone and held it up. You already said that on camera 2 weeks ago. Remember? And I have 12 emails, 4 voicemails, and video of you trying to illegally tow my car. Do you really want to keep going? Her face went crimson. She raised the clipboard like she was going to hit me with it, then caught herself. The deputy was watching now, standing next to his car with his hand on his radio. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside was a package of photos proving multiple homeowners violate the same rule without enforcement. Bird feeders, garden arbors, mailbox toppers, decorative shutters, all unapproved, all ignored. I had printed 20 copies and sent them to every board member, the management company, and my attorney. But this was the original set, and I had been saving it for this moment. I held it up. I stopped arguing and started collecting because the endgame was already set. This is proof that you have been selectively enforcing the rules for years. I have photos, dates, addresses, and a list of homeowners you have ignored while you harassed me. I am giving this to my attorney, and if you do not back down right now, I am also giving it to the local news. Stephanie stared at the envelope. That is private property. You cannot photograph private property. I smiled. Public view doctrine. I can photograph anything visible from a public street. And I did. She grabbed for the envelope, but I pulled it back. The deputy started walking toward us. Everything okay here? Stephanie turned to him. This man is harassing me. The deputy looked at me, then at Stephanie standing in the middle of the sidewalk with her clipboard raised. Ma'am, you are blocking the public right-of-way. I need you to move your vehicle and step back. Stephanie's mouth opened and closed. She looked at me one more time, then got in her Subaru and drove away. The deputy watched her go, then looked at me. You need anything? I shook my head. I am good. Thanks. He nodded and walked back to his car. I show it only after Karen repeats her claim one last time, on record. That happened at the emergency board meeting when my attorney asked Stephanie to explain the enforcement discrepancies. Stephanie stood up and said, for the third time, that her enforcement actions were consistent and fair. I pulled the envelope out of my bag and slid it across the table to my attorney. She opened it, reviewed the contents, and then entered the photos into the record one by one. Stephanie went silent. She did not say another word for the rest of the meeting. The HOA cancels the vendor relationship tied to the abuse in April. The new board, elected at the annual meeting, terminated the contract with Mountain States Plowing and hired a local company that charged half the rate and did better work. The savings were passed back to homeowners in the form of reduced quarterly fees. I got a check for $120, along with a letter apologizing for the prior board's conduct. I still live in the same house. The neighborhood is quieter now. The new board meets once a month, posts minutes online, and responds to emails within 48 hours. Enforcement is consistent and documented. I have not received a single bogus citation since Stephanie left. I still see Tom and Rick at the mailbox sometimes. We do not talk about the HOA much. We do not need to. My attorney framed the settlement agreement and gave it to me as a joke. It is hanging in my garage next to my tool bench. Sometimes I look at it when I am pulling wire or bending conduit, and I remember what it felt like to be buried under fake fines and threats, knowing that I was right but not sure if I could prove it. I remember the knot in my stomach every time I checked the mail, the anger every time Stephanie showed up with her clipboard and her laminated rule card, the cold calculation that came with deciding to fight instead of fold. I remember all of it, and I am glad I kept every receipt. The handrail is still there. It is scratched and salt-stained now, but it works. My mom used it last weekend when she came to visit, and she did not slip once. That is all I wanted. That is all it ever was. A piece of metal bolted to brick so the people I love do not get hurt. Stephanie tried to turn it into a weapon, and it became the thing that brought her down. There is a lesson in that, I think. When you weaponize the rules, you better make sure you are holding the right ones. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.